means in the year 2009, Gilberto Valer was a 25-year-old police officer living with his elderly father in the New York City borough of Queens. As you can imagine, law enforcement is an extremely demanding profession, and it gave Gilberto very little time to do anything else after grueling 14-hour shifts. All he wanted to do when he clocked off was collapse into bed and sleep like the dead. Then on his off days, he found himself far too exhausted to socialize, and this left Gilberto in something of a predicament. He longed for a romantic partner, but simply didn't have the time to look for one in person. So instead, he put his faith into the online dating website, OkCupid. This is how Gilberto met Kathleen Mangan, an elementary school teacher who recently settled in East Harlem. They hit it off fairly quickly, and after just a few months of dating, they moved into a small one-bedroom apartment together near 88th Street and 3rd Avenue. It was nice at first, Kathleen later recalled. We laughed a lot. He was a gentleman, but things changed after I got pregnant. After breaking the news to him, Kathleen expected Gilberto to be happy. Instead, he seemed horrified. He kept saying, "I can't do this, I can't do this." Kathleen later explained, but after he calmed down, he called my parents and assured them that he'd do the right thing. The apparent change of heart was a huge relief, but Gilberto's newfound fatherly enthusiasm was disappointingly short-lived. He drifted away from me so slowly I almost didn't notice. Kathleen said, then one day he just didn't seem interested anymore. Many blamed Gilberto's behavior on the stresses of being a new parent, and he seemed to prove his detractors wrong when, after moving his Nent family into a larger 2-bedroom apartment in Forest Hills, he asked Kathleen to marry him. Their wedding was held on June 19 of 2012, with their 9-month-old daughter Josephine being the unofficial guest of honor. Making things official seemed to renew Gilberto's fatherly instincts, at least temporarily, but he soon sank back into the same patterns of disinterest and sorely neglected his wife and daughter. He rarely helped with the baby. Kathleen recalled then, when he came home from the precinct after midnight, he'd stay up till 4 a.m., 5, sometimes 6 o'clock in the morning, playing video games or browsing the internet. As far as she knew, Gilberto spent most of his time online, browsing sports and policing forums. But one day during the summer of 2012, Kathleen walked in on him doing something else. Having worked as a teacher for the better part of the decade, Kathleen possessed an impressive level of computer literacy. This meant that when she walked into Gilberto's office that day, she recognized what he was doing. And what he was doing was a mass eraser of his internet browser's search history. Upon hearing her enter the room, Gilberto quickly minimized the browser window and pretended to have been doing something else. But Kathleen had no, and she found herself gripped by a nail-biting curiosity a few days later. And following Gilberto's morning departure, Kathleen crept into his office, then logged onto his computer. I noticed that there were 2 little image files at the bottom of the screen, she said, so I opened them. The images depicted an extremely disturbing variety of adult content, yet they also struck Kathleen as horrifyingly different from anything she had a cursory knowledge of. I've read 50 Shades of Grey, I know what that stuff is, Kathleen said. But this was different because the girl in the picture, she was dead. There was a time when a more insecure Kathleen had believed that Gilberto's dispassion stemmed from her lack of attractiveness. Yet following the disturbing discovery on his desktop computer, she realized something was very wrong with her husband. She sent him a text message, one that simply read, "We need to talk." Then when Gilberto returned from his shift that evening, he seemed visibly nervous during the confrontation. Gilberto broke down into tears and claimed that his interest in such deeply disturbing adult content stemmed from his inability to deal with stress. He promised to visit a therapist and swore he'd never visit any such websites ever again. I thought maybe we'd had a breakthrough, Kathleen later said. We were communicating, he was being honest, he was talking to me, but for the rest of that summer, I couldn't stop thinking about what I saw. Finally, on September 9th of 2012, Kathleen once again crept into Gilberto's office while he was at work, only this time, and on the advice of some online cybersecurity experts, it was to install a discreet form of spyware on his computer. I had no choice. She said I was scared, and she was right to be the following day. Kathleen used the spyware to find out which website sites her husband had recently visited. What she found was nothing short of horrifying. The names of the websites were chilling, but what truly turned Kathleen's stomach was seeing what her husband had been getting up to. I started going through his instant messages. She said, then all of a sudden, I'm staring at pictures of myself, pictures of my friends, pictures of other people. We knew Gilberto and his anonymous online friends had been fantasizing about tying Kathleen up, hanging her upside down, then cutting her throat with a razor-sharp knife. They said it would be fun watching the blood gush out of me. She later said another person said, if she cries, don't listen to her, don't give her mercy. And all my husband had to say in response was, don't worry, we'll gag her. But that wasn't all. And as Kathleen continued to scroll through Gilberto's messages, she uncovered an appalling escalation of their fantasy. They didn't just want to kill me. She said they wanted to cook me and eat me too, upon realizing that her life might be in danger. Kathleen immediately booked a flight to her parents' place in their home state of Nevada and took baby Josephine with her. Gilberto remained blissfully ignorant of her discovery and continued to browse violent imagery online. He Googled things like how to kidnap a woman and best human meat recipes. He also kept a secret folder hidden away among a veneer of innocent-sounding directories in which he kept photographs of the women he'd like to murder and cannibalize. Many were athletes and actresses, but many included his wife's family members, friends and co-workers. One picture was captioned, "I'll be eyeing her from head to toe and licking my lips. Longing for the day I cram a chloroform-soaked rag in her face." It was now impossible for Kathleen to discern her husband's sick fantasy from palpable threats to the safety of her loved ones. So with a heavy heart, she reported Gilberto's activities to the police just a few days later during the early afternoon of October 24th. Gilberto was enjoying a day off into his Forest Hills apartment when suddenly his phone began to ring. Gilberto didn't recognize the number, nor did he recognize the voice on the other end. Is this Gilberto?" The stranger asked. "It is the man himself," replied. "I'm sorry to tell you this, buddy, but I got this number from your insurance company." The stranger explained, "Someone's hit your car pretty bad by the looks of things. You're home right now by any chance, are you?" Gilberto didn't bother to answer the question. He simply ended the call, then walked outside with a furious urgency about him. Yet when he arrived in the apartment complex's parking lot, he saw that his car hadn't so much as a scratch on it. Confused, Gilberto turned around to walk back inside, but found his path blocked by three sturdy-looking men in suits. Gilberto Valier, one of them, called out. It was not a question, they knew it was him. "We're from the FBI and would like to ask you a few questions." Following a brief interrogation, Gilberto was placed under arrest. Then shortly afterward, he was charged with conspiracy to kidnap his own wife, Kathleen Mangan. Investigators soon discovered that there was no shortage of evidence and began cading emails which laid out Gilberto's strategies. In many of these emails, Gilberto made it abundantly clear that he was ready and willing to abuse his authority as a police officer to LW potential victims into a false sense of security. "This is what made the case all the more disturbing," said one U.S. attorney following Gilberto's arrest, "when you consider Val's position as a New York City police officer and his sworn duty to serve and protect it makes what he did unforgivable." By the time Gilberto's trial commenced, he had gained worldwide infamy as the cannibal cop of New York City. Yet as the judiciary set about determining his guilt, the court of public opinion was concerned with something else entirely to the public. It wasn't what Gilberto was being accused of. It was what he might do in the future Should he either beat the charge or receive a lenient sentence? Never in my career have I ever hesitated to tell the marshals to take the handcuffs off the client when I'm interviewing them. One-on-one said the disturbing adult content stemmed from his inability to deal with stress. He promised to visit a therapist and swore he'd never visit any such websites ever again. I thought maybe we'd had a breakthrough. Kathleen later said we were communicating. He was being honest. He was talking to me. But for the rest of that summer, I couldn't stop thinking about what I saw finally. On September 9th of 2012, Kathleen once again crept into Gilberto's office while he was at work, only this time, and on the advice of some online cybersecurity experts, it was to install a discrete form of spyware on his computer. I had no choice. She said I was scared, and she was right to be the following day. Kathleen used the spyware to find out which its sites her husband had recently visited. What she found was nothing short of horrifying. The names of the websites were chilling, but what truly turned Kathleen's stomach was seeing what her husband had been getting up to. I started going through his instant messages. She said, then all of a sudden I'm staring at pictures of myself, pictures of my friends, pictures of other people we knew. Gilberto and his anonymous online friends had been fantasizing about tying Kathleen up, hanging her upside down, then cutting her throat with a razor-sharp knife. They said it would be fun watching the blood gush out of me. She later said, another person said, if she cries, don't listen to her. Don't give her mercy. And all my husband had to say in response was, don't worry, we'll gag her. But that wasn't all. And as Kathleen continued to scroll through Gilberto's messages, she uncovered an appalling escalation of their fantasy. They didn't just want to kill me. She said they wanted to cook me and eat me too, upon realizing that her life might be in danger. Kathleen immediately booked a flight to her parents' place in their home state of Nevada and took baby Josephine with her. Gilberto remained blissfully ignorant of her discovery and continued to browse violent imagery online. He Googled things like how to kidnap a woman and best human meat recipes. He also kept a secret folder hidden away among a veneer of innocent-sounding directories in which he kept photographs of the women he'd like to murder and cannibalize. Many were athletes and actresses, but many included his wife's family members, friends, and coworkers. One picture was captioned, "I'll be eyeing her from head to toe and licking my lips, longing for the day I cram a chloroform-soaked rag in her face." It was now impossible for Kathleen to discern her husband's sick fantasy from palpable threats to the safety of her loved ones. So with a heavy heart, she reported Gilberto's activities to the police. Just a few days later, during the early afternoon of October 24th, Gilberto was enjoying a day off into his Forest Hills apartment when suddenly his phone began to ring. Gilberto didn't recognize the number, nor did he recognize the voice on the other end. Is this Gilberto?" The stranger asked. "It is the man himself," replied. "I'm sorry to tell you this, buddy, but I got this number from your insurance company." The stranger explained, "Someone's hit your car pretty bad. By the looks of things, you're home right now by any chance, are you?" Gilberto didn't bother to answer the question. He simply ended the call, then walked outside with a furious urgency about him. Yet when he arrived in the apartment complex parking lot, he saw that his car hadn't so much as a scratch on it. Confused, Gilberto turned around to walk back inside, but found his path blocked by three sturdy-looking men in suits, Gilberto Vallejo. One of them called out. It was not a question, they knew it was him. "We're from the FBI and would like to ask you a few questions." Following a brief interrogation, Gilberto was placed under arrest. Then shortly afterward, he was charged with conspiracy to kidnap his own wife, Kathleen Mangan. Investigators soon discovered that there was no shortage of evidence and began cading emails which laid out Gilberto's strategies in many of these emails. Gilberto made it abundantly clear that he was ready and willing to abuse his authority as a police officer to LW potential victims into a false sense of security. "This is what made the case all the more disturbing," said one U.S. attorney following Gilberto's arrest. When you consider Val's position as a New York City police officer and his sworn duty to serve and protect it, makes what he did unforgivable. By the time Gilberto's trial commenced, he had gained worldwide infamy as the cannibal cop of New York City. Yet as the judiciary set about determining his guilt, the court of public opinion was concerned with something else entirely to the public. It wasn't what Gilberto was being accused of. It was what he might do in the future should he either beat the charge or receive a lenient sentence. Never in my career have I ever hesitated to tell the marshals to take the handcuffs off the client when I'm interviewing them. One-on-one, said the federal attorney who defended Gilberto, shifted from day to day. Not long after he fantasized over Ponticelli's kidnap and murder, he became almost entirely consumed with the previously mentioned Andrea Noble. I swear, he wrote, if she lived near me, she'd be gone by now. Even if I got caught, it'd be so worth it. Gil seemed primed to act on the psychotic urges, but when the FBI raided his home in October of 2012, there wasn't a single scrap of physical evidence which suggested that he was about to kidnap, kill, or cook someone. And despite frequently boasting of his efforts to brew a batch of homemade chloroform, there were no traces of the chemical storage or its manufacturer at the Forest Hills apartment at his trial. One of Gilberto's defense attorneys, Edward Zas, laid out the crux of his legal argument. According to the client's direct messages, 3 different women were due to be kidnapped on President's Day. He said the day comes and goes, but nothing happens. Then my client changes the proposed date to Labor Day, but once again, that day comes and goes, and nothing happens. Nothing happened. Because it's all just fantasy, violent and disturbing fantasies, of course, but fantasies nevertheless befitting his profession. Edward Zaz spoke calmly and confidently in the courtroom setting, but he later admitted the difficulties of such a case. The only way you can defend this case practically was to take on the burden of convincing this jury somehow, really to a certainty, that he could never do this. Said Zas, but then, how do you do that in a case where the guy is admittedly interested in this stuff? Eventually, on New Year's Eve of 2012, renowned New York forensic psychiatrist Park Dietz interviewed Gilberto in his holding cell. Dietz rose to through his assertion that Jeffrey Dahmer was of sound mind when he committed his string of horrifying murders, and it was his job to determine whether Gilberto was willing or capable of acting on his lurid fantasies. Following a lengthy question and answer session, Dietz determined that Gilberto had no desire to actually live out the things he discussed online. Dietz already knew from B's NYPD psychology file that the officer had been administered the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory story, a standard test meant to identify personality structure and detect signs of psychopathy. The test showed no clinical psychopathology, DT said. And that's not something I run into very much. Even the most unassuming of people can display psychopathic traits, which means Officer Valor is either the most skilled manipulator Dietz has ever encountered, or he truly was of sound mental health. During the interviews, Gilberto openly discussed intimate details of his upbringing with Dr. Dietz and explained the origin of his bizarre and violent fantasies as a child. He'd been taken to a screening of Jim Carr's The Mask. The movie itself was amusing enough, but afterwards Gilberto remembered fixating on an image of Cameron Diaz, who at one point had her wrist bound before being tied to a tree. The Mask would quickly become a younger Gilberto's favorite movie, though he never told anyone why he enjoyed it so much or why he'd play the same scene over and over again. By the end of high school, Gilberto was a frequent visitor of a website known as Mookie's Kitchen, infamous for its depictions of terrified young women being killed, butchered, and then cooked in cruel and creative ways. However, in his real life, Gilberto was never anything but quietly respectful towards women and remained a virgin until he met his wife Kathleen. In fact, there are no available testimonies of him acting in a violent or threatened manner towards just about anyone. I saw the kinds of things Officer Valor was saying online, Dr. Dietz said, and there's no denying how disturbing they are. I also understand how the evidence could be construed in that way that suggests that he might act on such fantasies. But I see him as many steps removed from the kind of person that might start to take action to class someone as a potential offender. You need to be more than just whatever sick thoughts are floating around their head. Dietz went on to explain he need all the aggressive actions and character flaws that indicate they might be that 1 in 1,000 monster we're all afraid of. But in Officer Val's case, I couldn't find them during his trial summations on March the 7th of 2013. Gilberto openly wept as he listened to his attorney describe his wife's decision to divorce him. His foolishness on the internet, his insensitive, ugly thoughts have cost him everything. One of them said, "The conversations are preposterous, they are disturbing, they're disgusting. We should be upset that people are thinking these thoughts, but they do not constitute a criminal offense in response." The state's prosecutor painted Gilberto as a reckless, impulsive man who was just days away from acting on his perverse urges. There is something incredibly wrong just on the fact that, with a new York City police officer talking about killing a high school student and then Googling to try to get information about her address, U.S. Attorney Randall Jackson said that is a man who was trying to move a plan into action. Think about your favorite restaurant. Jackson continued, if you were to find out that the chef at that restaurant had a deep-seated fantasy of poisoning all of the people in the restaurant, and that night after night he was engaging in conversations with other people about how we could poison the restaurant goers, would you continue to eat at that restaurant? Of course you would. 5 days following summations and after many hours of deliberation, the jury convened for their final court appearance. The foreman appeared visibly exhausted as he stood back up, took a breath, and read the verdict. "We find the defendant guilty," he said, on the charge of a conspiracy to kidnap. Gilberto shook his head in disbelief as he was led away by BFFs, and many claimed the verdict was a clear miscarriage of justice. Were the jury even watching the same trials as Gilberto's mother, asked one journalist. But in the days of that, followed a member of the jury publicly defended their decision. "We did what we did in good conscience," said Victor Pinero, "because we believed his fantasy was going to step into reality in the same way an addict needs a larger and larger dose. He was needing things that were more and more real. He was bringing it into real life." At his sentencing, Gilberto received life in prison for the conspiracy charge and a maximum of 5 years for accessing the Federal National Crime Information Center database without authorization. Gilberto's mother was horrified and was a central figure in coordinating his eventual appeal, which shocked everyone when it was met with success. During June of 2014, a judge from the Federal District Court announced that Gilberto's conviction was set to be overturned, saying the evidence supported his contention that he was engaged in only fantasy roleplay, and by that time, Gil already served 21 months in prison, and the lesser conviction regarding unauthorized access to the NYPD database was commuted to time served, and he was released since his exoneration. Gil has been incredibly open about his past and present, and authored the book Raw Deal. The untold story of NYPD's cannibal cop Amazon describes the book as a controversial saga of a man who was imprisoned for thought crimes and look into an online world of dark fantasy and violence that most people don't know exists, except maybe in their nightmares. Gilberto Valier might have escaped a jail sentence, but the FBI hadn't finished with the dark fetish. Network in January of 2013, they raided the Hamilton, New Jersey home of 22-year-old Mike Van Hees and found evidence of fantasies involving children on his personal computer. Shockingly, his wife defended these fantasies, telling reporters, "I was cool with it. It's disturbing, yeah, but you have to accept your partner's flaws in a marriage. No one's perfect." Following his arrest, Mike began cooperating with the FBI and aiding them in the apprehension of 2 other suspected child abusers, a 65-year-old police chief in Bedford, Massachusetts, and a 61-year-old former high school librarian who in 2009 had faced accusations of inappropriate contact with 4 male students. The FBI intercepted Mike's communications with the 2 men, assumed his identity, then made an ambiguous request from the man from Massachusetts. Essentially, the FBI asked him nothing more than to show up at a certain place with stuff for a thing. And when he did, he brought along a taser, a claw hammer, some meat skewers, and a dental instrument used in the 1800s, removal of human teeth. Dale Ballinger, aka the Moody Blues, was arrested in the UK following a joint operation between British and American police. After a 4-day trial at Canterbury Crown Court in July of 2014, Ballinger was found guilty of grooming an underage girl online. He also admitted to several other offenses, including administering a poison or noxious substance following an incident, in which he put a cloth soaked in drying cleaning fluid over a female friend's mouth. In July of 2010, after giving him a 9-year jail sentence, the presiding judge said his behavior was abhorrent, shocking, and dangerous, while psychiatrists ruled that Ballinger was not suffering from mental illness. "None of this is real," he said during an attempt to defend himself. "I'm an idiot because I went and put stupid things online, thinking that it was funny." But what's perfectly clear in Ballinger's case is that his posts were intended to be anything but comical. He had already committed a serious predatory offense by the time he came into contact with Gilberto Valer, one that he undoubtedly deserved to be punished for. Whereas in Gilberto's case, he was convicted of a thought crime, not a violent or predatory one. Perhaps Dr. Park Dietz has best summed it up when he said, "What troubles me is that the whole world fails to recognize that just because someone has a desire to do something doesn't mean they'll do it. The only problem is very few people find themselves gripped by violent fantasies, and among those that do, an even smaller percentage spend hours and hours at a time writing about them with strangers on the dark web." Serial killers have been known to spend years at a time preparing for their killing spree, and much of it includes lurid ideations that are shockingly similar to Gilberto Valle. So where exactly is the line between ideation and intention? Perhaps it's not Dr. Dietz who said it best, but rather an old folk singer who once sang, "And if my thought dreams could be seen, they probably put my head in a guillotine, but it's all right, ma, it's life and life." Webb, the year was 1998, the year France won its first World Cup, the year the Euro was born, and the year I, at the age of 15, had the most disturbing experience of my life. I was on my parents' computer surfing, the very slow internet of the time I was researching Franco's dictatorship for a school assignment, when my friend Jake sent me an IRC message. "Hey, a guy at school told me about something super cool you can do on the computer." He said, "What's that?" I asked first, open, start second, go to run third, type in this URL and let me know when you're done. He sent me the URL in question, and I did as he said. Then a sort of command window opened up. It had 2 boxes for typing text and a normal command line. I let Jake know when it was done, and he said in one box type your name, in the other, a password, and in the last one, the word Wario. I followed his directions to the letter, and then he opened a box that asked me to put a nickname. So I put no name, like no name in English. I thought that was interesting. Then the window closed, and after a while, a file opened that said, "Welcome to the Oregon Art Tile chat room user. No name has joined." I spent the next few months talking to my friends in that chat room. I had no idea who created it or how it worked. Apparently that chat room only worked in the Oregon area. So in theory, you could talk to anyone there. But in practice, the only people there were Jake, me, and a couple of other people. There was also a kid from high school who lived across town. And one time someone showed up who claimed to work in tech support for an insurance company, but left quickly when they only responded with, "Where do you go to school?" I don't know why we use that room instead of a regular one. Maybe we like the secret clandestine role. But one autumn morning, I was in for a surprise. I had been made an administrator. I had no idea who had done it, but I strutted around in front of my friends for several days. I could change what people wrote to make them look like fools. Though the truth is, I didn't use my powers much, mainly because I didn't know how until one day I logged in and saw that the anonymous messages to administrators were not empty. As usual, I wish I had never looked, if it was a very long story, from a user named Sarah6754. Written in several short messages, it told how her parents mistreated her, wouldn't let her leave the house, and how she would sneak out to go online that night. Sarah6754 told us that she had seen the chat room open on her father's computer and was going to tell anyone she could. I asked her who she was and told her that if it were true, she would have called the police by now. But suddenly the chat room stopped working. I tried to open it again, but I got an error every time I searched for the command and run. I was furious our secret hideout with Jake was gone. However, 2 days later, I was watching the news and they reported the following: 16-year-old girl is killed by her father after trying to escape through her bedroom window. The mother is in police custody, but the father is still at large. But really disturbing, police had found descriptions on the family computer of boys named Jake. No name and 2 others, where the father detailed how he imagined them and the horrible things he would do to them if he found them. They were things too gruesome to repeat here. That man was never caught as far as I know. He is still at large hiding among us. I am sure he will never be caught. But I am even more thankful for the fact that he did not catch us. This happened a lot of years ago when Silk Road 1 was in its prime. I was looking for a specific substance at the time, but in my area I couldn't find it at a decent price. It was frustrating because it used to be easy to get, but for some reason everything had dried up and people were looking for alternatives. Some friends in the underworld told me about Tor and the Onion Network and how to get into a place called Silk Road. For those who don't know, Tor is like the Google Chrome of the dark web, the program you need to access those weird addresses that only exist there. Silk Road was a marketplace on the dark web where you could buy and sell just about anything using Bitcoin and relying on a reputation system to make sure you got what you paid for. Looking back, the whole experience seems surreal, but it was one of the coolest things about the internet. At the turn of the Millennium Tour was called the Onion Router because it randomly changed your IP with every click. 1 minute you were in Ohio, the next in Guatemala, and then Oslo, it was untraceable, unless of course the system had ways of tracking you. But that's another story. The truth is that I got on tour, logged onto the dark web, and got to Silk Road. It seemed simple enough, so I made a post as if I were on Craigslist or any forum. Hi, I'm looking for mushrooms, please respond. It was basic and a little silly, but I didn't have much choice. I hit publish and waited the next morning. I checked and there was no post. I said to myself, what the hell was I thinking? But a few days later, someone responded. He had what he was looking for and asked me to send him a private message. I agreed, and we started talking about the details. Suddenly, I found myself agreeing to send a stranger almost 1,000. It was a lot more than I intended to spend. But for some reason, I like this guy. Charming drug dealers have that effect. I guess that's how I knew he was legit. I only had $400 set aside for the purchase, so the other $600 was going to come out of my rent and bills for the month. I had to convert it all to Bitcoin and send it to a random wallet address. At the time, it all seemed very futuristic and exciting. After payment, the guy agreed to send me 1 ounce of mushrooms per week for 5 consecutive weeks. The delay was for security and would allow me to sell more over time. It all made sense to me, but the delivery never came. 2 weeks went by nothing, and the guy's account disappeared from my contact list. That charm I felt was that of a scammer, and I couldn't see it through the screen. I felt like there was nothing I could do. The real problem was that I was planning to sell that first shipment to cover the rent money I had spent. I wasn't going to be able to pay in 2 weeks. Then the first of the month came, and I was up to my neck in debt, so I did the only thing I could think of to get even. I left a bad review for that guy on Silk Road. I said that he had ripped me off, that he probably ripped off a lot of people, and not to give him any money. Don't do business with this guy. He'll steal your money for sure. I wrote I was running at full speed, but to no avail. He tackled me in the back, and I crashed to the ground. Crashing, the last thing I remember of him was a yellow tooth smile and his scarred face as he covered my mouth with a strange-smelling rag. I tried to scream, but there was nothing I could do at that point. He had me when I woke up. I saw his horrible face and his eyes staring intensely at me, while he was smiling a very sinister smile. I was in a basement strapped to a table surrounded by medical devices. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. I could only watch him approach me with a huge needle and hand it to another man in a hospital gown before passing out again. The next time I woke up, I was in the same place where I was attacked. I was groaning and confused as a bunch of cops ran towards me. What the hell, I seemed to be all right or something. For a moment, I thought it had all been a nightmare. But then the facts confirmed that it wasn't, that it had all been very real, and that things were much worse than I could even imagine. After that, I tried to forget about everything and concentrated on getting money to pay the bills. It was exhausting, but I got some extra jobs and sold some stuff. Then I started saving for the next month, but life got pretty complicated for me. One day I came home feeling like relaxing and logging on to the computer for a while. And I remembered all that crappy experience on the dark web and decided to take a look at my post on Silk Road. And there it was, a new message. Hi, I'm a trusted Silk Road seller. I saw your post about the scammer. I had an encounter with him a few days ago. He also tried to scam me, so I am retaliating. I used one of my alternate accounts to sell him several ounces of MDMA. He already paid. And what I mailed him was a pound of sugar and a note with a sad little face and his full name. Is there anything else you'd like this user to suffer from? I had no idea who this person was, but it got me thinking about the possibilities. It was sort of like a code of honor among thieves. And truth be told, I was fascinated that the Silk Road system was self-correcting. Unfortunately, I couldn't think of any creative ways to make the scammer suffer, so I didn't give the seller any suggestions. He told me, no problem, that the guy would have enough trouble in the next few weeks. He then asked me for my Bitcoin wallet address, and the amount I had been scammed. I thought long and hard about my answer. Part of me wanted to lie to see if I could get something good out of this whole horrible experience. But another part of me knew that this person might find out the truth. And come on, we were talking about the dark web. These people could find out anything, and if I lied, it could cost me dearly in the end for my stunt. So I told him the truth, even though it seemed crazy at the time. But he gave me his approval and said he would be back soon. I couldn't believe it. My bad review was going to pay me back after everything that had happened. I wasn't sure any of it was real, but the next morning, all the money was back in my wallet. I wish I could explain the feeling I had, as if my soul had left my body at some point and was now returning. I believed in humanity.